Okay, so what support does Active Record actually give us to do the thing that we just showed an example of? Because we showed the code we wish we had, right? We want to be able to essentially believe that these data structures have attributes that are just collections of the owned resource, right? A movie is supposed to have many reviews, so we'd like to just believe that a movie has an array of reviews kind of attached to it. And then we saw how this actually gets modeled when you've got database tables in a relational database as the way that you're storing it, right? We can use this idea of filtering by matching foreign keys to implement the notion of relationship. So what we need is a way to bridge those two representations, and that's what the active record associations support gives us. It allows it allows us to write Rubyistic code that looks pretty much like what I showed at the very beginning, that will automatically manage the table relationships so that we can use the tables to represent these one-to-many and many-to-many associations, so that once you've set this up, you really don't have to worry too much about the keys and the joins. Those things essentially get generated for you, just like when you use these chained wheres and stuff like that. You don't have to worry about the SQL query. There's an algebra engine that's essentially formulating the query according to what you want. So how do we implement the idea of a movie having many reviews? Well, we open our class movie, we say has many reviews, and pretty much that's it. That's not totally it, but that's really close to being it. There's one other step, which is we have to actually make sure that the keys are set up in the database to actually implement this. Similarly, for a review, if a movie has many reviews, it makes reasonable sense to say that the review belongs to a movie, so we could just say that. OK, now we're really done. OK, let's go a little bit more deeply into what this means. And by the way, when you first see this stuff, sometimes it's easy to get confused which one is the has many and which one is the belongs to. In terms of the database tables, as we'll see when we walk through the example, the foreign key belongs to the model that has the belongs to in it, right? And remember, again, what's the thing we're trying to model here? We're trying to model a movie having many reviews. That means that a single movie row in the database is not going to store the IDs of all the reviews associated with it, but it's perfectly reasonable for a single review to have the ID of the one movie that owns it, if that makes any sense. Right? So this is kind of a mnemonic that you can use if you forget where the foreign key goes. Whichever class you're thinking of as the belongs to, I belong to the other class, the foreign key belongs to me. Sometimes I think of it that way. So here's the basic idea. The reviews table, as we saw in our Cartesian product example, is going to get a foreign key. The foreign key is going to be a reference to a primary key in the movies table, indicating which movie that review is for, so that when we dereference movie.reviews, Active Record will generate a SQL query that will perform the join. Basically, it'll generate the exact query that would have done that filtered Cartesian product, such that the movie ID in the reviews table will match the primary key in the movies table. And not only that, if we have a review, we can dereference review.movie to look up the one movie whose primary key matches what that review is for. And this is the example where I wanted to show that we're not really, it's not really true that the only things we have to do is put in has many and belongs to in the models. We also have to make sure that the fields we need are in the tables. Because by default, when we create a reviews table, it might not have occurred to us that we're going to need a foreign key so that it can implement belonging to a movie. The one thing that we didn't show in our example, which I was trying to show, but got thwarted by pastebin, is that you do have to explicitly add in the foreign key fields. Right? There's no magic way to tell after the fact, because I've said that a review belongs to a movie or a movie has many reviews. That presupposes that I've created the fields that are necessary to track that information. So that's kind of our side of the bargain. We create the table structure. We make sure the right foreign keys are in place. We don't accidentally pluralize them like I just did, leading to an error. And then we can use has many and belongs to. So once we've done that, and had I done it successfully in the demo, now you can indeed say movie.reviews. And what you get is an enumerable. Right? Remember, what does an enumerable mean? It doesn't mean that it's an array. But remember that we actually, when we said you could pretend it carries an array around, that's not really what we want. Right? The Ruby way of thinking is what we want is it carries around a collection whose elements can be enumerated. And just like we already talked about that queries in Active Record are done lazily, same thing here. Right? When I say movie.reviews, the query doesn't actually get executed until I try to start consuming the results. So really, don't think of it as are you getting an array. You're getting an enumerable. And just be happy with that. You can also go in the other direction. You could say review.movie, and this will cause a lookup of the foreign key, giving back the movie whose primary ID matches the foreign key. You can add new reviews for a movie. Now, remember that when you're adding a review, part of the contract that we said, the review belonging to a movie means that when we create a review, the review has to know which movie it's associated with. So there's a couple of different ways to do this. One way is you could set the foreign key directly and explicitly. But it's much nicer to use methods like this, right? Just like movie.reviews gives you back an enumerable of reviews, you can also call build on it And you can start by creating a review where the foreign key of the review has automatically been filled in with the primary key of this movie object. You see what I mean? So the difference between creating a brand new review out of the blue, like I was going to do on the command line, versus doing it this way, is that build and create ensure that the primary key of the owning object gets correctly set as the foreign key in the object that's being created. So that's why they're different from new and create. You can also use the less operator, which is like appending to the end of an array. This presumes that new review is a review object that you've created, and the less operator, because it knows what collection it's being added onto, again, it will correctly set the foreign key in the newly created object. And the thing that comes back from movie reviews is also something that behaves like an active record model, so you can call things like find on it. So as I said, when you say movie.reviews, that doesn't actually cause a query to happen, but it sets it up for a query to happen. So that if I say movie.reviews.find, then what actually happens is the query that would have run for reviews now gets refined to automatically include these other conditions. And again, the database is not actually hit until the first time you try to consume a result. So let's conclude with this quick question, which is which language mechanisms that you've seen would be appropriate for implementing associations? If you were the author or designer of Active Record, what mechanisms would you use to make this functionality available? Could you build these behaviors into the Active Record base class, which is the ancestor of all your models? Could you put these behaviors in their own module, or could you put these behaviors in their own class? So which of these three is or are appropriate ways to do this?